Okay, I call the meeting of the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Mr. Dossett.
Here.
Ms. Novak.
Here.
Mr. Shepard. Ms. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Stoltz.
Here.
Ms. Stewart.
Here.
Mr. Zongrel.
Here.
We have a quorum. Next thing on the agenda is changes to the agenda. I would like to allow for public participation following new business, the first case, consideration of the hotel. Is that acceptable to the commission?
Yes.
Thank you. Change is noted then. Next is approval of the minutes of our March 3rd, 2010 meeting. Are there any additions or corrections?
Move to approve.
Second. Moved by Mr. Dossett, seconded by Ms. Smith. Any other comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved as written. Thank you, Tony. Written communications, we have a letter from Marine Bank. And that's all. Audience participation. If anybody would like to speak about anything hotel included, we'll also allow comments on the hotel as we consider that under new business. Does anyone wish to speak at this time?
I guess I can reserve Marine Bank's
Yes, absolutely.
comments until then.
Yes. No audience participation. We'll move on. We have no continued public hearings, no old business, no new public hearings. Next item is item number 6, new business, case number HP-2010-L-01, 209 South Broadway, Urbana Lincoln Hotel, preliminary determination. We'll do staff report first for order of things, and if the commission has questions of the staff, we'll do that, and then we'll allow for the form preparer and the prosecutor and anyone else who wants to speak. So, Rebecca.
This is an application by Brian Adams to designate the property at 209 South Broadway Avenue as a local historic landmark. The owner is Marine Bank Springfield, and there's a representative of the bank here this evening. Tonight is a preliminary determination to decide whether the property qualifies for designation as a landmark by meeting one or more of the criteria set forth in the zoning ordinance. If you determine that it does qualify, there'll be a public hearing on May 5th. And following the public hearing, the Historic Preservation Commission would make a recommendation to the City Council on designation. Some background to the hotel. It was built in the early 1920s in the Tudor Revival style. It was built by a group of Urbana businessmen and investors. It was designed by Joseph Royer, one of Urbana's most prominent architects. Some of Royer's other buildings in town include the Champaign County Courthouse, the Urbana Free Library, the old post office, several churches, and a couple of our downtown buildings. Joseph Royer's importance to Urbana's architectural heritage is celebrated by the city's recently created Joseph Royer Arts and Architecture District, and a brochure for that district was in your packet this evening. In 1982, an addition was built onto the north side of the original hotel to accommodate a conference center. And in 1964, Lincoln Square Mall, the nation's second indoor shopping mall, was built adjacent to the hotel, enclosing the main entrance on the south facade. The mall and the hotel were listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2006. In 2008, the city received an application to designate the hotel as a local historic landmark. That was Historic Preservation Case number 08L01. In that case, the Preservation Commission made a preliminary determination that the property qualifies for designation as a local landmark. Then, following the public hearing, the Preservation Commission voted to recommend designation to the City Council, and the City Council voted against designation. 4 votes against, 1 vote for, due to economic development concerns for the hotel. So this evening, your task this evening is to determine whether or not the hotel meets any of the criteria set forth in the zoning ordinance in section 12-5C. So the first of those criteria is whether it has significant value as part of the architectural, artistic, civic, cultural, economic, educational, ethnic, political, or social heritage of the nation, state, or community. The Urbana Lincoln Hotel was built in the Tudor Revival style of dark brick and stucco with half timbering and stone detailing. It is the only remaining hotel in downtown Urbana and is the only commercial building downtown in the Tudor Revival style. The building was designed by Joseph Royer, the most prestigious architect in Urbana between the late 19th and mid-20th centuries. The city recently designated the Joseph Royer Arts and Architecture District to recognize his contributions to the city's historic and architectural heritage. According to Raymond Beal in Urbana, A Pictorial History, which is right here, and he has a two-page spread actually on the hotel. I don't know if any of you have seen this, whether you can see that on the camera. But he actually calls the hotel a landmark in present-day Urbana. And the Urbana Lincoln Hotel has really been an important part of the community since the early 20th century. The second criteria is whether it is associated with an important person or event in national, state, or local history. As already mentioned, the hotel was designed by Joseph Royer. He was a native of Urbana and a University of Illinois graduate in civil engineering. He was Urbana's city engineer, and as the city engineer, he designed the Champaign County Courthouse, which was completed the year before the hotel was built, and it brought him immediate recognition. Further discussion about Joseph Royer can be found in the notable work of a master builder, so a later criteria. And the application also states that the hotel is significant due to the symbolic link to Abraham Lincoln. And although the hotel was not built, obviously, when Lincoln was in Urbana, but he did stay at a hotel that was on the same site. So Lincoln is commemorated through the name of the hotel, and there was also the statue, which was formerly located there at the hotel. The next criteria is being representative of the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural type inherently valuable for the study of a period, style, craftsmanship, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials, and which retains a high degree of integrity. As mentioned previously, the hotel is an excellent example of the Tudor Revival architectural style. This style is one of the period revival styles which was popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Buildings in this style emphasize steeply pitched roofs and prominent cross gables on the front facade. The hotel does display several of the key features of Tudor Revival architecture, such as half timbering, tall, narrow, multi-paned windows, and prominent chimneys. The 1923 hotel has a steeply pitched side gable roof with a medieval tower-like projection on the southeast facade, and it is representative of the distinguishing characteristics of the Tudor Revival architectural style. The second part of that criterion deals with the integrity of the hotel. And the original hotel has had two additions. As mentioned, in 1964, the construction of the Lincoln Square Mall, and in 1982, an addition on the north side. And while both of those additions have obscured views of the original structure, the 1923 hotel nonetheless retains sufficient integrity to convey a sense of time and place. The next criteria is being a notable work of a master builder, designer, architect, or artist whose individual genius has influenced an area. And as mentioned before, the hotel was designed by Joseph Royer. There is a biography of Royer in the application as well as in the brochure. And some of the local buildings, aside from the courthouse that he designed, were the sheriff's residence and county jail, which unfortunately no longer exist. The Urbana Flatiron Building, which also doesn't exist, the Urbana High School, which does, the Urbana Free Library, which also exists, the Urbana Country Club, the Post Office, Tiernan's Block, and the Conan Building, both of which are downtown. And the city recently created the Joseph Royer Arts and Architecture District to commemorate his historic and architectural heritage in our community. The next criteria is being identifiable as an established and familiar visual feature in the community owing to its unique location or physical characteristics. The hotel is located in the heart of downtown Urbana. It's been a focal point for the community since the early 1920s and could be considered an icon in terms of being readily recognizable and its visual association with Urbana in general. The next criteria has to do with being a particularly fine or unique example of a utilitarian structure. And the hotel is not a utilitarian structure, so it doesn't qualify under that criteria. And the next one, the last, is that is in an area that has yielded or may be likely to yield information important in history or prehistory. And again, the hotel does not qualify, as far as we know, under that criteria. We're not aware of any archaeological significance of the area. In your staff memo that you received, there is a list of suggested findings, and we would ask that in making your decision that you do refer to a list of findings. So your options this evening in making a preliminary determination in this case are to find that the nomination does not meet the criteria for designation, or to find that the nomination does meet the criteria for designation. And in both cases, if you could give an explanation of your reasoning. The recommendation, based on the application and analysis as set forth in the findings and in the analysis in your memo, staff recommends that the Historic Preservation Commission find that the landmark nomination for 209 South Broadway Avenue qualifies for designation as a local historic landmark based on criteria A, B, C, D, and E of Section 12-5C of the Urbana Zoning Ordinance. One other thing, we did receive a letter from Marine Bank Springfield from Dan Lanterman, an attorney for the bank, and he did raise an issue of that the application was not notarized. So when the application was submitted, we accepted it and looked at it for, reviewed it for completeness and noticed that it had not been notarized. The applicant came back in and did notarize it. It was then accepted as complete. And I had simply scanned the application right when I first received it and forgot to change out the pages. But we've actually changed the application form to remove that section on the application because it's not required by state law. We had an internal review of all of our planning applications and removed the notarizing section of a lot of them. So that, I do have a copy of that if any of you would like to see it, or I could make copies available to you if you'd like. And we do have a representative from the hotel here this evening, from the bank, I'm sorry, and the applicant as well. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Did you want to address any of the other errors that were in the letter?
So I did say at the beginning the process that the application went through in 2008, that it came to the Historic Preservation Commission, and you found that in the preliminary determination that it did meet the criteria, one or more of the criteria, and then at following the public hearing, you did recommend that it go on to the City Council with a recommendation for designation. And the letter states that that the Historic Preservation Commission did not recommend designation. So that was not correct in there.
Yes, Mary.
Rebecca, I wonder if you could remind me about the definition in criterion F of utilitarian structure, because I think you could argue, unless there's some special architectural meaning for utilitarian, that any commercial property, including a hotel, would be a utilitarian structure.
My understanding of it is that it's something that is not architecturally sophisticated, that it's a plainer building, and so in a particularly fine or unique example, something like a gas station that would not be a high architectural style generally, and so it is a very plain building, but it captures a time and a style and place. That's my understanding. I don't know if Robert want to elaborate on that?
That's my understanding too. I think of sometimes warehouses, and again, it may not be a high style architecturally, but it has significance.
Other questions of Rebecca? If not, would the applicant like to speak at this time?
My name is Brian Adams. I live at 412 West Elm Street in Urbana. Yes. Is that Brian Adams, 412 West Elm Street in Urbana, Illinois. I'm the applicant that submitted the nomination, and I just want to thank you all for reconsidering the nomination. I know the first time around there was some success, but ultimately not the outcome that I was hoping for and many people were hoping for. So I just want to say that I hope this time around it's more successful and the hotel does become a local landmark, because I do think that it's deserving of that status. Since I submitted the first nomination in 2008, I've continued to do a lot of research into the architect Royer's life, and currently I have a list of about 100 buildings that he's designed, and some of these were buildings that we already were aware of, but some of these buildings or many of these buildings are ones that I've rediscovered by going through some of the records and some of the old newspapers. And one thing that I did note, lately I've been sort of playing with the numbers and making charts and graphs, is that of all of these buildings, this roughly 100 buildings, there's only 2 hotels that there's any record that Royer designed, and both those hotels are here in Urbana. One is the Urbana Lincoln Hotel that the nomination deals with, and the other is the Lincoln Lodge Motel on University Avenue. So in the larger picture of buildings that Royer made, hotels are pretty rare, and we have 2 of them right here in our city, so I think that's another reason why it would be very important to landmark this building. And one other thing, I've been communicating with some people that are affiliated with the Historic Hotels of America program through the National Trust, and was interested to find out that many of the hotels that are now within their very beautiful guidebook of historic hotels to stay at, many of these hotels were in worse condition than the Urbana Lincoln Hotel is. Some hotels were unoccupied for 100 years, some for decades, yet these hotels have been turned around and made into successful businesses, and I think that, again, that's very encouraging, that it indicates that a hotel like this that's designed by an important local architect in a city with a major university right in the heart of the city has potential, and it's been demonstrated that these hotels can come back and can be can function and can draw people in. So anyway, I just want to thank you again for reconsidering this, and again, I hope that this time around it's successfully landmarked.
Thank you. Any questions of Brian? Thanks, Brian. Next, the representative from the property owner. And our routine is you have to sign in and then state your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Joshua Ishmael. I'm Assistant General Counsel with Marine Bank in Springfield, Illinois. Marine Bank is the managing member, and it's actually the sole member of an entity called Equity Asset Investments, LLC. Equity Asset Investments LLC is the current property owner that the hotel, or for the hotel. Equity Asset Investments gained title to the property as a result of foreclosure proceedings for what would be the third time, I believe, second or third time. Mr. Adams pointed out that Mr. Royers designed several buildings or homes in the Urbana area, and I believe that is a key point to his argument that this building deserves historic preservation status. The bank would argue that quantity does not necessarily create the necessity for some sort of historic preservation. And I'm not going to hit on all the finer points of Mr. Lanterman's letter. He drafted the letter. You can read it. I'm just going to touch on some basic ideas that we've been batting around. And I'm just here to really reserve that objection on behalf of the owner. So while Mr. Royer has many locations in Urbana, this particular location is, as was pointed out, a Tudor Revival style building. Mr. Royer, outside of Urbana, I don't think has a national notoriety like a Frank Lloyd Wright. In fact, if you do a Google search, the only thing that comes up for Mr. Royer are Urbana locations. The style of the hotel, I guess, is classified as Tudor Revival. It's not classified as a Royer style. Apparently he had many styles. One of his favorites appears to be the Tudor Revival, for which the hotel followed. The hotel is, as we all know, attached to Lincoln Square Mall. Lincoln Square Mall was constructed, I believe, in 1964, and it does not adopt the Tudor Revival style. In fact, it has what many would probably consider a modern style for 1964, and attached directly to what was the front of the hotel, I believe, the grand entrance, which of note was one of the prominent features in 1924 when the hotel opened, was the front of the hotel. The mall now conceals much of that from the street. In 1982, I believe there was another addition, and I think it almost doubled the size of the original structure. So what's left of Royer's design is actually, I don't want to say very little, but the original design was manipulated not once but twice. The other thing I wanted to touch on that, and now I know where I was going with this, the other significant attachment to the local lore is the Lincoln connection. I found it interesting that the name, the Urbana Lincoln Hotel, was subject to a vote, and the people of Urbana got to decide. The name was picked because, and some of the names, the Belvedere, and I can't possibly imagine what connection some of those names had to Urbana, but it was done by a popular vote. I don't know that the articles that were relied upon in Mr. Adams' application point specifically that the people of Urbana relied particularly on the Kerr's Tavern connection. Coincidentally, Kerr's Tavern, I did again, the only reason I mentioned Google is because it seems like we all can say you can find about anything on the internet. Some things you don't want to find, some things it seems like everything's out there. A search of Kerr's Tavern in Urbana, I couldn't find a single hit on Google or Yahoo or any of the modern search vehicles. Lincoln Day Today is a summary of Lincoln's life based upon letters and research that historians throughout the area have compiled, and it can be found at the Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield. And it does not have any mention of stays at Kerr's Tavern. It does mention other locations in the Urbana area. Part of the appeal of the hotel is its style and its look, and it's mentioned about the current status of the hotel. A lot of what has come up is important because of the last point that I make, that hotel sits in the heart of Urbana, and as Ms. Bird pointed out, at one time it was a central focal point to the city of Urbana. In its current state, it is essentially bankrupt. It did bankrupt the Jumers. It nearly bankrupted J. Bagavan, and it did bankrupt the most current owner because not for the value that they purchased it at, it's because they couldn't keep it going, and it could not maintain a level of occupancy to even cash flow on the most basic level. It couldn't pay its utilities. So we all know the current status of the economy and the woes that people are experiencing. A building like that will rely upon the TIF district and the financing vehicles that are available through sources like the TIF district, banks like Marine, but without the ability to maintain itself on a business level, I don't think you're going to get the level of development you're going to need to even put it back in its current state. It needs a national flag where it can have national marketing, bring people into that particular location. The historic preservation status can affect that because most national flags want their own style. Jumers was a local operation, when I say local, Midwestern type operation, so it worked within a certain theme. So when you look at the overall end result, historic preservation could hinder the ability for the hotel to come back to what glory it essentially had in the past. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else in the audience wish to participate? Any other comments? Okay, commission discussion? Art?
Well, this is a essentially identical nomination to what we saw some years back. And so consequently, from the nomination standpoint, I have to say that the case is pretty much the same. The argument that the owners have brought up from Marine Bank on a number of different levels doesn't work very well. First and foremost, the use of the building and the economics are not at issue for the designation process. So we just have to look at the criteria. It's clear from the nomination that the discussion of Lincoln et al. Was really in the context of how it may have achieved the name, and the building is certainly not nominated in any way due to the fact that Lincoln visited the hotel, which of course he couldn't. So beyond that, there is certainly no limit on the number of buildings by a particular architect that can be designated under our ordinance. And of course, among the things that we're very interested in doing for an architect, as important as Royer is to the Champaign-Urbana area, to preserve as many of the styles that he did provide for us, so that the community has an appreciation of the breadth of the architectural palette that Royer worked in. And so, and there's no denying that this is a major, major visual landmark in downtown Urbana that virtually everybody within the city is aware of. So, frankly, I don't see anything that you brought to us that's very compelling with respect to the argument about designation. So I don't see that my vote will be changed.
Other comments? Other commissioner comments? Nope. Anyone want to put a motion forward, please? Art?
I'll go ahead and move the recommendation by the city planner and staff that the nomination meets the criteria A through E, with one exception. Let's see, this is on page 6, item 7, where it talks about Urbana Lincoln Hotel as a notable work. We need to change in the second sentence there. The hotel was designed, not the house.
Mm.
Okay, but otherwise, essentially items 1 through 10 as are listed.
And
But
did
in
you
the
want
staff
to
memo.
address the criteria that it qualifies under specifically, please?
Okay.
You don't need to read them if you don't want to, but list them alphabetically
Alphabetically?
for clear.
A through E.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I did. I said.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Zongrel, seconded by Mr. Dossett. Is there any additional discussion? Okay. Do we need a roll call vote for? Yes. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Dossett,
Yes.
Ms. Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Stoltz,
Yes.
Ms. Stewart,
Yes.
Mr. Zongrel.
Yes.
The preliminary consideration is unanimously approved. The next step in the process is then that the public hearing will be held before the commission on Wednesday, May 5th at 7 o'clock. And there'll be further opportunities for public participation and discussion at that time as well. So thank you to the applicant and the representative from the property owner for speaking before us and presenting the materials. Next item for new business is plan case number 2125-T-10, proposed amendments to the Urbana zoning ordinance, historic preservation ordinance.
So over the last year or so, community development staff and legal counsel have been reviewing the city's historic preservation ordinance, section 12 of the Urbana zoning ordinance, trying to strengthen areas of it, to clarify areas of it, and to make the process and the ordinance itself easier to use and to understand. And so you have in your packet this evening the draft that we have prepared with some pretty considerable revisions, and so we're asking for your feedback on that. And the process for this is that this will go to the Plan Commission as a zoning ordinance text amendment. And that will go, if you make a recommendation on it this evening, that would go to the Plan Commission's April 7th meeting. No, I'm sorry. Today's April 7th. Would go forward to the May 6th Plan Commission meeting. I'll just outline some of the major changes, and then there is in your memo a list of section by section changes that we're proposing. And we did try to make a strikeout and underline format, which is how we normally deal with zoning ordinance text amendments. But the document, because we moved so much of the text around and changed so much of it, it was really unwieldy and very hard to understand. So unfortunately, we just gave you the two different zoning ordinances, and it's more onerous for you, but to give you both of those to compare and see the differences. So the first two major changes listed on page 2 of your memo have to do with the landmark designation process. And we're proposing that what is now 2 separate meetings, as we had this evening, a preliminary determination and then a public hearing. We're proposing that that be moved into one public hearing. So the reason for that is when we get a landmark application and we have a preliminary determination, although we notify the property owner and the applicant, and we don't do a full public notice because it's not a public hearing. That comes at the second stage when we have the public hearing. And that kind of, people could walk into that and think, well, wait a minute, you've already made a determination at your earlier meeting. Why wasn't I told about that? So we thought that it just was more efficient and more fair to the public to combine those into one meeting. And by combining those into one public hearing, we would then no longer have a preliminary determination vote and then a second recommendation vote. It would be just the one vote and the one recommendation to the City Council. The third major change listed there is that we would eliminate the property owner register preference forms, but maintain and clarify the valid protest procedures, so that there's often confusion because the registered preference in the zoning ordinance is only in the historic preservation ordinance. It's not in other parts. In other zoning actions, there is simply the valid protest procedures, which are outlined in the zoning ordinance for all types of cases. And we thought that it was better to be consistent with other actions in the zoning ordinance. So that now would refer to the section in the zoning ordinance that deals with protests. The certificate of appropriateness application process has been clarified. So there's new language that includes exempt undertakings, which would not require review, for minor works, which would require administrative review, and major works, which would require full commission review. So the process has been further explained and honed, and also we've added criteria to review demolitions to that. The current ordinance, as you know, does not include any criteria to review a demolition, and it's significantly different than other certificate of appropriateness projects that you would be reviewing that we thought it deserved separate criteria. And then the tables 12-1 and 12-2 that outline the level of review for certificate of appropriateness applications. We have added quite a few projects to that. I think originally, well, I'm not sure originally when the tables were created if they were intended to try and capture all types of projects that would come before you. But we've found in the last few years working with those tables that while they're very helpful, most of the projects that have come before us don't really fit into one of those categories. So we've tried to flesh out more projects, adding more projects to it. And then also you'll see under each of the types of projects, so the categorization of projects that we're proposing now includes ordinary building maintenance, ordinary site maintenance, building changes and new construction, site changes and new construction, and then demolition. And under each of those categories, we've added a catch-all that says that if a project doesn't fit into one of those, that it would have this type of review. And then we have expanded and clarified the procedures for the certificate of economic hardship, which, as we learned, I think 2 years ago, we learned that the zoning ordinance really wasn't very clear and wasn't very helpful in that process, and so we've tried to clarify that. And we have used some criteria based on an Illinois Supreme Court decision in Oak Park to help us with that. So those are the major changes, and then you'll see the changes article by article. I won't go through those, but we can certainly take questions. Robert and I both worked on this with our legal counsel, and we would both be happy to answer any questions that you have about why we've changed things or why we're proposing to change things, where we found the recommendations or the proposals that we've included in here and so on. And if you're, this evening, if you're comfortable with, after the discussion and your comments, if you're comfortable at that point, then if you could vote to have a recommendation to the Urbana Plan Commission, and then this would go forward to the Plan Commission as a text amendment case.
But kind of on the same front, if the commission needs more time to mull things over, we can
Yes, yes.
continue this
Yes,
until next
we did
meeting.
try to get this to you earlier, but everything always takes longer than one expects, and we weren't able, we were hoping to get it to you a week or two earlier than we did. So if you do need longer to review it, or if you have questions that maybe some of your questions we're not able to answer because they were changes recommended by our legal counsel and we need to go back and ask them. But I would ask that if this evening you are not ready for it to move forward as a plan case, then perhaps if there are other questions and comments and so on, that you could give those to me, that we don't get to tonight, but then you could give those to me in the intervening weeks before our next meeting so that I could then work on those and prepare answers and changes based on your comments.
Art?
Yeah, so we can go through some of the things we know we already, okay. So on page 1 of the draft, actually under definitions, as I was reading alteration and then certificate of appropriateness, to me there were some activities that did not overlap between those two. For example, reconstruction is not part of certificate of appropriateness. I'm just wondering if we can simplify this. Well, first of all, let's look at alteration. Is there really a difference between erection, construction, and reconstruction? In any sense, that legal sense that requires that distinction? Would construction cover all of that?
Would reconstruction?
Would
That-
construction
Construction.
cover all of those? Erection, construction, and reconstruction? I mean,
Are you thinking about combining those three?
if it does, I would say maybe just combine those, and then we have 3 things that are possibly going on: relocation, demolition, and construction. Does that cover every possibility of an alteration? Oh, as well as changes to the exterior architectural features. That
Right.
has to stay there.
But what if, say, someone wanted to change a window? That's not really
That would be-
construction.
Change of an exterior architectural feature?
What if it was a plain window? What if it was a replacement window, but they actually wanted to change the window opening?
I think that would be a change of the architecture, wouldn't it?
Thank
It
you.
wouldn't be erection and it wouldn't be
No.
reconstruction. So,
But I think it would change the architecture.
Mhm.
yeah.
And if
Well-
that's the case, then for certificate of appropriateness, all we need to say there is a certificate approving plans for alteration, period. Because you've already defined everything.
Hmm. Okay. Right. Okay.
Right, okay.
That under alteration, the clause including but not limited to, trying to get people to realize that it's a broader statement than just, if someone builds a house, addition to a house, that's an
Mhm.
alteration.
Right.
If someone demolishes a building, that's an alteration. It's not just modifying, putting on new siding, for instance.
Right.
Because a lot of times when people think of the word alteration, they think of something that's existing, but you're changing in minor ways.
Right.
We want to be clear that it included some
I mean,
major changes.
you can
We could probably
certainly
just-
leave the including but not limited to.
Yeah, we could probably
Yeah,
take
just-
out erection and reconstruction, probably.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit confused. So you're suggesting that we change in certificate of appropriateness definition that a certificate of approving plans for alteration and then strike relocation, construction, removal, or demolition because we've already defined that in alteration?
Yeah.
That, okay, sorry.
Okay.
I mean, that
Yep.
doesn't change, I don't think.
I
Right,
think that works.
I agree,
Yeah.
yeah.
Alteration. Yep.
Okay.
And then essentially you can do certificate of economic hardship the same language. You could just leave it at alteration.
Right. Alteration.
Actually, you have the preliminary determination is still there on page 3.
Oh, in the definitions?
Yeah.
Okay,
So that can
right,
be
good. Good
eliminated.
catch.
Okay, under relocation. I don't think this was changed, was it? From, I didn't look, but it doesn't matter. It seems there's another, after the first sentence, it gets into something that I don't see how you can relocate. You can't reposition the location of a significant event or a prehistoric or historic occupation or activity.
Okay,
A building you can.
we'll check into that.
So
second
that just
sentence.
needs to be, I
Make
think,
sure it's
redone so that it makes logical sense.
not. Okay.
Yes. While I'm doing this, I'd just like to say I really think the one hearing change is a great idea.
Mhm.
Can we talk about that a bit, or is that an accepted, agreed
Not necessarily, we can talk about it.
perspective?
We
but
can
after
talk
I-
about it, but
after I
Art
get
still has
through
the
it.
floor.
Yeah, okay.
Sure, I think that's a good idea. On page 4, an undertaking, any alteration, blah, 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 should do it.
Undertaking. Under.
Undertaking, oh, I see,
That is
okay.
the definition.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then page 12, yeah, that's just a simple typo. Under capital E, sentence C, it says by first-class mail with containing a copy.
Okay.
That's page 12,
Page 12.
capital E, 1C. It says in there, by first-class mail with containing a copy.
Okay.
Then on page 15, under capital C, review criteria, item 2, it seems to me it should say something, a second sentence, rather than avoid removing distinctive materials or altering features, avoid removing or substituting distinctive materials.
Okay.
Because I think even just removing the materials could be a problem, whether you replaced them or not. Then, page 16, item 10. Under, that's demolition. It says there that a certificate of appropriateness to undertake demolition, we should be able to find at least one of the following conditions exist. The demolition would be limited to a non-significant portion, or B, the demolition request is for a non-contributing building, or C, the building official deems that it just simply must happen for public safety reasons. It doesn't actually give as an option demolition for economic reasons. For a certificate of economic hardship, does that mean that, does that preclude?
I think that's because the certificate of economic hardship is the next section.
Okay.
So granting it under a certificate of appropriateness, My
would be a
sense.
separate, and it would be.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to be sure that was the case. And then there's the table. I wasn't quite sure on page 20, under the description of undertaking, that roof cladding with like materials will constitute a minor work, but application of the same type of roofing materials would be exempt otherwise for building changes and new construction.
What's
Building changes and new construction. There's an item down there that says application of the same type of roofing materials would be exempt.
Okay. I see, so there's a
But-
duplicate there.
If I understand, under the description of undertaking for building ordinary maintenance made in kind and using like materials, would still require administrative review. Is there a reason for that distinction?
Just a mistake, I think.
Oh, okay.
So that's not exempt, is that what you're saying?
Which one is?
We've been doing it as a minor work, and I would suggest that it stay there.
And so then, for only the first category?
I would say, because it is ordinary maintenance, right? So it makes sense for it to be located, in my view, it makes sense for it to be located under that set rather than under the later set.
Mhm.
So then the level of review would be different for those two sets. Is that what you're saying? Or should be different? Is that right?
I think we could just strike the second version of it under building changes, if we just strike application of same type of materials, if we just strike that whole row and leave it up in
I see.
roof cladding
Okay.
with like materials.
Okay. Okay. And then, actually, because I guess in a sense, further down under building changes and new construction, you have roofs, including roof lines and materials.
So that one's under
And now
changes.
that one goes to major works.
Because that's under changes.
Mhm.
Okay.
So that category.
That means you were changing any
Right.
of those
Right, so if
items,
you were
and
using
therefore
different
requires.
types of roofing materials,
Okay.
or if you're changing the roof line.
Okay. And then on the next page, that's page 21, site changes and new construction. Fences. Okay. Fences, because it's new construction requires only minor works review?
Yeah, if someone wanted to remove a historic fence, that'd be a major work. But if someone wanted to construct a new fence, it'd be a minor work. That's what's being proposed.
Right. But-
Comparing that art with the current ordinance, there is only fences listed, and it's administrative. The
Right.
only listing for.
I'm just trying to factor that in. So fences could be added to a historic property with minor works, as a minor work.
Right, I think we reviewed one for the Lindley House, is that right? As a minor work, but minor works means that the chair of the commission is involved in the review
Right.
as well.
Okay.
Wasn't the Lindley House just the painting of an existing fence?
I thought
No, it was
that
the
was-
fence addition, because
was
they
an
were
addition.
having some trespassing problems with people cutting through their lot. So it was and the fence had gone up before they applied for the certificate of appropriateness.
Yeah, well, that may be one of the reasons that it's flagging in Art's mind, and you can ask whether or not a historic building ought to have some fence control on it. I mean, so if we have no fence around the Busey property, and someone wants to come in and put a fence, you and the zoning administrator look at it. If either of you don't like the situation, you can always kick that to HPC for review, right? That's your right by the ordinance. So we've always got Alice to kind of pull us into the to the fray if she needs that. So in that way, it could sound like a minor work. At the same time, that's kind of a major modification to the lot upon which that historic structure is based. So, I don't think I could argue against moving that into a major work if that's what you want to suggest. I mean,
No, I'm just exploring.
yeah.
And it was done, it's already been done once by administrative review, right? And twice.
Also
and
on,
didn't see any problem.
Dan Folk's rental property on the north side of West Main.
Mhm.
So that was an administrative, there's just a very small fence they used to have a driveway on the left side of the lot, and they were moving, well, actually, it wasn't a driveway, it was just a parking pad, and they were closing that off and putting a driveway on the right side of the lot, and to ensure that the curb cut wasn't taken away, so to ensure that no one actually drove up onto the lawn that they were planting, they installed a small fence, and that was administratively reviewed.
So now, as Scott described it, a minor work after administrative review could be sent for major
So that-
HPC review.
Right, that's why the ones that we did move from major works to minor works, we were thinking of cases like Maria Ryan, the number 1 Buena Vista Court, the moving of her downspouts and the installation of awnings, which it's onerous on the property owner to have a public hearing, as well as on the commission and staff and so on. There's just so much more involved and it takes so much longer to have a public hearing in front of the full board. So we thought that minor works still has that safety net, if you will, that it's being reviewed by both the zoning administrator and the chair of the Preservation Commission. And if either one of them either thinks it doesn't meet the criteria or is unsure or thinks that this is something so big that the full commission needs to look at it, if either one of them feels that way, then it will go to the commission. They both have to agree that it should either be approved or be denied for it to go through administrative review and not come to the commission. So that was why we did move some
Okay.
things down.
And that, actually, I wasn't paying attention to that part of the ordinance. That language is very explicit in the
Yes.
writing of the, okay.
Yes.
All right. Because I can certainly see where sometimes patios are really major items, like in the Royer House. I think that would probably require full review, the commission. That's such a significant feature of the building. Yep, that was all I had.
Mary?
I had a question about the new table 12 for non-contributing properties. And I was comparing it with the existing ordinance, and I wondered if you could explain to me why there were the 2 categories of structures more and less than 50 years of age at the time of designation, which almost seems to suggest a quasi, maybe slightly contributing category or something. Is that what that was?
Let's see here. Yeah, I think, I've thought about that myself. For instance, decorative glass, building changes and new construction, including decorative glass. So you had a window with beveled glass or colored glass. If it's a building less than 50 years old, it's not going to have, by and large, it's not going to have historic significance. So it wouldn't be historic materials. So. But it's already yeah, well, there could be buildings that are actually non-contributing. They might have beveled glass or colored glass, and could be 100 years old, but the building has been modified such. And it should have some sort of review, I think, even as a non-contributing building, because some non-contributing buildings can become contributing buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're covered up, but what's underneath is actually can be a nice historic building.
We also have the situation on West Main Street where council went ahead and designated the district, but anyone who objected to their property being included was made non-contributing. So we had sort of this arbitrary indication of non-contributing, not based on anything really within the ordinance. Other things, Mary? Joan? Scott?
Yeah, I guess I want to go to this first item in your summary. I just need to be convinced that the single meeting scenario gives us the opportunity, for outreach and communication with the public. And I know you guys do all kinds of postings and stuff like that, so I'm trying to get back up to where that is here. Hang on. In my mind, the two-step process is sort of a warning to the owner and the public to give them time to respond. Truly, that should not change the criteria as defined by the ordinance that the commission should respond to. So, if there are 50 people that come in that are emotionally attached to a building, or 50 people who come in claiming economic duress, we shouldn't take that into consideration in the context of the way we read the ordinance and its application. So to me, it's more a matter of timing, and I'm just trying to imagine what happens in a one-meeting scenario. So can you help me feel more comfortable with that? And in terms of outreach, it's that part.
Yeah, so the way we've proposed the changes, it refers to the noticing section in another part of the zoning ordinance, which is standard noticing for all public hearings. And so we do this now for the public hearing part. So the second meeting that you have in a landmark application, we notify the property owner. Currently, we notify the property owner as soon as we receive the application. And on that, with that letter, we have the date of the preliminary hearing and then the projected date of the public hearing. And we also send a letter to the applicant saying that we've received the application and that it'll go forward on this date. But then we don't notice the public at all. There's no other notice to the public for this meeting, the preliminary determination. And then for the public hearing, we send notice to the property owner, all property owners and residents within 250 feet of the property. We also put a sign on the property and put a legal ad in the newspaper. And all of those run only for the public hearing. And it would be onerous and expensive to do all of that noticing for two separate meetings. And so that was one of the reasons that we felt it was better to combine the meetings, because you're only telling people about it after you've already had this discussion about it. But it seems to me that if you have an interest in the property, not necessarily financial, but whatever type of interest, you would want to know right away. You would want to know of all meetings that are dealing with this. So by combining them and by ensuring we put language in there that allows the property owner, or that gives the property owner the right to ask for a continuance, so that if they feel like, as you said, the first meeting's a warning, if they feel like they need more time to do research or to whatever, they have the right to request a continuation to the next meeting. But it would still be within that one public hearing, and so the noticing of that one public hearing would continue, so everyone would know from the first meeting that it's going to be discussed at the next meeting as well. So my sense of it is that it actually, it's more, it provides better notice to the public because it gives them the notice for this first meeting where you're discussing it.
Yeah, and allows for the chance of continuance.
Mhm.
And legal probably likes it that it would then be the same public hearing structure
Right.
as all the rest of the commissions and
Mhm.
boards have.
Yeah, that's also,
Yeah.
that's another problem, that when we have different types of, when applications go through different processes, it's easier for everyone to make mistakes about what's going to happen. Whereas if we have a process that is uniform throughout different types of applications, it is easier to administer, and for the public to know what's coming and for the commissions to know what's coming.
That's, just in the time I've been here, about 5 years, there's been a couple of instances where I remember where someone came to the public hearing, say a neighbor, and they had actually had information on the historic significance of the property. And they talked about that they wanted to contribute that, and we told them, well, we've already determined that, we've already talked about, and we made that determination in a previous meeting, and then someone will say, well, I didn't know about that, when did that happen? So then you have to say, well, there's a meeting, and we do an agenda, but we don't publish it as a public hearing, and it just seems like, if I could talk about the other aspect of this as well, it seems a little bit artificial sometimes to divide a preliminary determination sort of decision on making a recommendation. Honestly, it seems a little bit artificial to divide those two. Imagine, for instance, if the Plan Commission applied for a rezoning, and then imagine if the Plan Commission had to hold one meeting to determine if it qualifies for rezoning, and then held a separate meeting to make a recommendation on whether it should be rezoned. It seems like that's kind of an artificial distinction, and sometimes it's easier to say, well, it qualifies under criteria, et cetera, or doesn't qualify, and we do or don't recommend for its approval. The other thing is that second, the way it's set up now, the ordinance actually kind of implies that the first determination is on technical grounds, and then that second recommendation should be on what? You know, it doesn't really say exactly, other than based on the public hearing. So it leaves the impression that you all should be considering not only just the public input, but there are other aspects as well, say economic aspects and all of that. And is that your forte? Do you want to have to make a recommendation on those aspects? Sometimes, again, it's easier to make a determination that it qualifies under these criteria or doesn't, and then make a recommendation to either for or against.
Actually, if you remember back 2 years ago when the Urbana Lincoln Hotel was nominated for designation at that time, I remember clearly Art made a comment that after the public hearing, he made a comment saying, well, we determined last time that it met the criteria, and that's what my vote is. That's what I'm here for. I'm judging it on whether or not it meets the criteria. So, I mean, that is just an example of what Robert just explained about the separation of the two votes. Also, we did also try to make it clear in the ordinance that the commission always has the opportunity also to continue a public hearing to another meeting if the commission feels that you need more time, or if you want to give more opportunity to other people as well.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm going to have a little trouble finding stuff because I loaded this in Word and now I'm off format, but under page 8. Well, no, it's page 8 of the ordinance. So 7.4B. When the notices of public hearing is sent to the property owners, and this probably gets back to this concern about going to one meeting, and I'm convinced that's good. These letters, I mean, I've never seen one of them, and so they are sort of overview the rights and obligations of the parties that they're addressed to. I mean, I can imagine this gentleman from Marine Bank just getting a letter and having to go scrambling for where this property is and who has control over it. So
We include a copy of, we have I think we call it a guide to the historic historic preservation ordinance, and it discusses landmarking and the landmark designation process, the district designation process, as well as the certificate of appropriateness process and the certificate of economic hardship process. And then in the letter, we specifically refer to that, and we explain the process that the commission will make a recommendation to the city council, and if it's designated that any future alterations would need a certificate of appropriateness, and please refer to this guide. And usually, the property owners will call and we'll talk through it with them as well.
yeah, okay, great. Under the next section, I just wanted to make sure I understood, you know, there are a lot of dates in here, and, you know, we have the demolition ordinance and stuff like that. Is 7.4D, so I'm on page 4 of your packet, page 9 referencing the ordinance, 7.4D. Are the dates that you're listing, do they match, are they rational with items such as an application that might be filed in response to a demo request? We've got that's a 30-day hold, right?
45.
So there's 45 days, so there's enough time in the system.
When we get an application for demolition for a property that is on the demolition delay list, there's a 45-day hold. But if during that time a landmark application is submitted, the demolition application is frozen until the landmark application process is there's a result of
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
And the way that the dates that we picked, we actually looked at the calendar and counted. And so the 60 days is, even though it would be very unusual for us to need 60 days, it could happen depending on the day of the month that someone submits something. If they submitted it the day after an application deadline, it could actually take that long until the next meeting, and it has to do with the notification requirements. So the public notice has to be published in the newspaper, I think it's 15 days ahead before the meeting, and we have to submit it to the newspaper something like 3 or 4 days ahead of that. So, and then there are weekends in there, and so it adds up very quickly.
Yeah. Okay, great. Just a comment here on your page 5 of the packet, page 10 of the ordinance. I like the idea of the wording. I think that's a nice change, but that did catapult me into a couple of questions later on. I'll just kind of store that for now. On the last paragraph of page 5, I guess so page 12 of the ordinance. I guess I didn't get from the context, and I just may have misread this, so you've already assured us of this, but essentially the Preservation Commission can also continue a meeting, not not just the applicants or the respondents. Okay. I missed that somewhere in all of this.
Actually, that's in your bylaws, that you can
Okay.
continue it, so it's not actually
Yeah.
stated in the ordinance, but you could always continue a public hearing.
Yeah, okay, great. I don't know, I don't want to make this time to grind an axe, but under statement of purpose, I'm in the ordinance now. Providing a mechanism to promote the educational, cultural, number 1, providing a mechanism to identify and preserve the distinctive historic, architectural, and/or landscape characteristics of Urbana. You know, there's no further language in the ordinance that refers to vegetation except to exclude it from consideration. I'm just going to read what I typed. If we don't want to do anything with, for example, historic trees, then this word should just be dropped from the ordinance. I mean, you know, if we aren't going to drop it from the ordinance, then I'd guess I would challenge us to come up with what a distinctive historic landscape characteristic might be, and then to make that more robust. We have trees in town with plaques around them. And those are the kind of things that I worry about. But as it is, as I read the ordinance, I don't see anything that happens except to kind of discount landscape, and that happens, I don't know, 10 pages or further on. So that's just kind of a comment. I don't
What
have to
about
respond.
the, would you consider the bird bath at Buena Vista Court a landscape element? Because that is included in both in the National Register Historic District and in the local historic district, and it could be considered an appurtenance, but it could also be,
Yeah.
maybe that's what
Yeah,
the
yeah,
landscape
yeah.
characteristic is getting at.
Forget I said anything.
I would think that some of our properties have hedgerows as a lot demarcation, and that could be a landscape feature, although we're not calling that out as a contributing
Yeah.
feature necessarily. But
Yeah. So you did catch me grinding my axe on trees then. Sorry. Axe on, yeah, right. I'm just paging through this, sorry. I didn't see what else I might have here. Okay. This is under the recording section of the ordinance, which looks maybe like it's on page 11 of the draft ordinance itself. Let's see, is that right?
Page 13?
Under historic district status recorded, that's what I'm looking for.
It's under both the historic district and the landmark. Page 10. On page 10, it's towards the top of the page, number 3.
Oh, yeah,
The
right.
second piece?
Right.
But it's also on page 13 at the top of the page for landmark.
Right, okay. And I think my question was, after the Preservation Commission shall record a copy of the ordinance designated in a historic district at the office of the, it's just, perhaps a silly question. This means that a potential property owner would be able to see through a standard title search that a building is actually in a district?
Yes.
That's, okay. That's what I thought it meant, but. okay.
We've already recorded all of our landmarks and districts.
Right, okay.
We did that just recently.
Right underneath there in F, under repeal, I guess at the bottom, in the end of 1, if you have a repeal and properties have been recorded as being in districts, then you should unrecord those with the county, right? If they're no longer in districts? And I don't think this specifically says that. So you just need to unrecord if you've recorded.
Right,
Right?
okay.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Under the next section, which is historic landmarks. Okay, let me find this here. B, notice. Under notification to property owner, this maybe gets back to the concern about the single meeting thing. you know, every now and then I get caught in this, you know, I didn't get it, you know, certified first-class mail. It doesn't cost you a whole lot of money, especially when you're talking about these single meetings specifically pertaining to notices to property owners. So that's just a suggestion, to certify mail these things so that you've got receipt delivery in the event you come into some kind of a legal problem. And I guess under the review process for the public hearing, so now I'm on page 12 of the ordinance. In item 1, public hearing, that's where I wasn't seeing the words about an HPC continuance, but maybe I was just blinded by this time.
So that one, it states that the owner of the property can ask for a continuance, but in
Continuation.
your bylaws, it says that
Okay,
you
that's
can
right, you told me
continue
that
anything,
already.
yeah.
Sorry. I may have started really getting confused at this point. Going to the ordinance, section 751, let's see where, page 13. The question I was asking is whether, and maybe this is another bylaws question. This section here does not need to detail the protest protocol during HPC review? Our bylaws tell us what that protocol is?
No, the protest would be to the city council.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And
All right.
that is outlined elsewhere in the zoning ordinance.
Okay. I like the fact that you defined undertakings in the new glossary, because I got caught up on that.
Does that make sense about doing away with the registered preference form? We did get, there has been a lot of confusion because between a registered preference form and this valid protest. People would say, well, why do I need to do that again? I've already given you my preference. And then there's been times when we told people that you could have done a valid protest process, and they said, well, we already turned in those forms to you, and we'd say, well, no, you didn't. You turned in a registered preference form, not a valid protest form. And by the way, you have to do that. You have to go to the city clerk's office. And they said, well, that's right across the hall from you. Why didn't you just walk my form over across the street and it would be a valid protest? But it's, the point is really that it's at the, what's the word for it, like instigation, I guess, of the property owners. They would need to take that upon themselves to work on and file a valid protest. It's not something that city staff really should be doing, because then that way we're we're inserting ourselves in the process too much, I think.
I got a couple more, then I'm done. On page 18 of the ordinance, under appeals, point, looks like D2, just the difference in the way people use language perhaps, but in 2, once an appeal has been filed, the work allowed by the approval of a certificate of appropriateness or certificate of economic hardship shall be stayed until the appeal is decided, discontinued, stopped. I don't know. Maybe that's plain language for other people, but when I hit stayed in that sentence, it's like too legalistic a term for me or something like that. So, you know, that's just that feedback.
Right here. 18, E2. We did have frozen. Does frozen make sense?
Yeah, yeah, stayed just.
Stayed was
it's not
our
a usage
legal
that-
department.
Was it?
I had written frozen, and he said, stayed is a better word. So-
Well, I like frozen better. All right, so, thank you, Commission, for your attention. That's all I have, so.
Okay. Kim, anything? Some additional time. Yeah, I have to agree. I did not have time to do the level of picking that I would like. Yes.
Actually, you're talking about trees, triggered something in me. I understand we can't designate individual trees, but it was always the intent when the ordinance was originally written that landscapes like woods could be designated, or a farm field could be designated, even if there were no human structures involved. And I assume that's still the case under this revision, right? The other thing was, in the table, page 20, once more, building changes and new construction. And we have painting of unpainted masonry, which I certainly agree with, but there are some other possibilities too. I can see that in some cases, painting of unpainted wood might be undesirable if it's in one of these Tudor-style buildings, or
That's true.
if it's a window, because people do paint windows.
What are you thinking that?
So I was suggesting that maybe if you painted an unpainted material, previously unpainted material, that you might want to have minor works review.
Okay. Like metal, maybe. But wood.
Maybe you could exempt metal.
I think you want to.
Well-
I think you want to paint wood, or you'll be in trouble in a few years.
Yeah, but some of these timber
Well, his
buildings,
point's well taken. The timber, Tudor revival buildings that have the fake half timbering might have some kind of wood sealer on them, but they're either stained or have some kind of natural wood finish, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say painting of previously unpainted materials.
I think to get back to your earlier question about.
Unless, I suppose, maybe you could exempt metals. Can you conceive of a situation where?
Yeah, that's true. A galvanized metal that would be
Okay.
part of a feature. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Copper,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess, I'd be worried about that.
Uh-huh.
We don't bother people about colors when they can paint, but,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
painting things that haven't been painted before, I think, can be a problem.
Mhm. That's a good point. Robert, you had a comment on.
I was just thinking about your landscape question a little bit more, and whether like a farm field that has nothing in it constructed, and it could be designated probably just under the archaeological criteria, I'm wondering. So maybe another aspect of the landscape reference is for if you have an archaeological site that's designated.
But it could be a site without a defined archaeological site too, right? We have an archaeologist in the audience.
Mhm.
We could have a site, so an undisrupted farm field could just be a site. If you haven't done an archaeological investigation, you may not know.
The site of something.
Yeah.
A battle or whatever, just grasping here. But
Right. This
Well,
came-
well, we do
This
have-
came up when we were originally
Mm-hmm.
writing the ordinance.
yeah.
I brought it up actually in the context of, could we designate Busey Woods? And, you know, obviously, there's precedent for such things. There's Muir Woods, and there's these woods, and the woods were very central to the very location of our community where it is. So, and that is practically the last remnant of it. So,
Well, I guess go back
I
to the
did not want
criteria.
to see that would not be a possibility
Okay.
under our ordinance. And I think the way it was originally
Mhm.
drafted, it was intended that way.
Mhm.
Of course, the Secretary of the Interior parts of the ordinance don't, you know, it's about things that have been built. So, I don't know, I would need to go back and look at things a little bit more closely. We do have an interesting one, though, and I'll shut up after this. Bob Vaden is certain that he can follow a transect line at Weaver Park that was probably laid down in the 1830s through that woodlot there on the northeastern part of Weaver Park. So, you know, you could maybe find the surveyor, he did significant work in the community and all that kind of stuff. So that's another interesting one in addition to the Busey Woods thing.
Okay, I had a question. Why did we drop building from definitions? You're saying building's a structure now?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
We thought that it was just repetitive.
My only concern is National Register, which we use with some frequency, does distinguish between the two. And I think that's why it was different to begin with.
Okay.
So I noticed that we have National Register incorporated in this, in the back somewhere.
Okay, we can just put that back in.
And you could look at the language in National Register Bulletin 16A that would distinguish between buildings and structures.
16A?
Yep.
Okay.
It's downloadable online. And the other question I had was, let me find my spot. With regard to the voting, if we have members absent, on your memo, page 4, section 7-3, I'm just curious about how that came about.
That was actually just one of the things trying to make things consistent over different types of decisions. And only in this body, I believe, was the language that was in the ordinance about voting, that was only here. And so we thought that it would be better to be consistent with other types of decisions.
Okay.
And it's also, why should the Preservation Commission have a higher bar in the voting?
Mhm.
So,
Nope, that's great. That's what I was curious about. By the way, your report is excellent. I thought it was very helpful. It's still, you know, we still need to go back
Yeah.
and forth, which is
Very
what I'd like to
onerous.
have additional time for.
Mhm, yeah.
But I really like the way that you highlighted things and you made the most of not being able to strike out.
yeah, good. Well, I did try doing the strikeout, and so for a couple of months, we had this, 40-page document that had, literally an entire page that was
I think it's
struck-
more confusing
stricken.
that
Yeah,
way.
it was.
It's-
I couldn't
it's
understand
fine flipping
it,
back and
so-
forth, but,
Mhm.
other comments then? Do we need a vote to continue or?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. If you want to.
So I'll make a motion to continue work on the redrafting of the Historic Preservation Ordinance
our
till
May.
the next meeting, May meeting.
Mhm. Seconded by Kim Smith. Yes.
Question. So, might you incorporate some changes in the draft from this session
Mhm.
into that
I
session?
can do that and send you the new copy, and then if you go through and as you find things, if you send them to me, then we can try and be more prepared for the next meeting so that we would be able to, if there were things we didn't want to include, we'd have an explanation as to why, and if there were things that we saw, oh, right, that makes more sense, we'd be able to do that and have a new version to you by the next meeting, so, yes.
Or would that be, or do you think that would be too confusing to have all these multiple drafts?
Well, I could
We could,
do these changes,
As
and
long
then
as
you
it-
could just send me comments on these changes, and then for the next meeting, we'll send you another draft. So you'd get a draft right after this with the comments that we've talked about tonight, and then one draft in the memo, with the memo for the next meeting. But in the meantime, you could send me comments.
That seems like a lot of drafts, but I think it would be helpful to have the ones that we've done tonight incorporated. And as long as it's dated, as long as we can define which version we have, I think it's okay. Do you have dates on the?
Yeah, there are dates on it.
Yep.
I was going to say either that or just make a list of the suggested changes and whether you think they should go in or reasons why they shouldn't.
Mhm.
Just so that, you know, when we get there next week, we don't have to rehash things that we
Mhm.
talked about. So.
Yeah, I
Right.
think it would be helpful.
My pre-
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. My preference would be to get a Word file with the strikeout, annotate, track, basically changes, tracking. for
From
any-
this
From
version.
anything we did tonight.
Okay. Mhm.
And then for me to get a Word file, because I had to go from your PDF file to Word. And I think you can force Word to keep pagination, so, and I apologize for this, I don't know where I am on this, because I'm on that screen. But that would be helpful for me.
We generally don't send out Word documents of things because they're
Changeable.
things that we've published, so we turn them into a PDF, and even though you can then alter that in other programs, it could be changed and sent out with horrible things in it that would look like it came from us, but
I can
Yeah.
make that happen no matter what format
True.
you send me a file.
true.
Why do you want a Word file as opposed to PDF?
Well, because I just don't like to waste paper. It's a
No,
thing
but
for me.
why not a PDF?
Well, because I can load that in Word, and then I can track, then she can track my changes. So
Oh.
instead of 6 people marking down on, pieces of paper,
Okay.
eventually you can get these to where, I think document management gets a lot easier if you use Word, but.
You can also make comments on a PDF, but I believe you need Acrobat Professional
Yeah,
to do that.
yeah,
Which
yeah.
is expensive.
Okay, any other discussion? If not, we need a vote on whether to continue. We don't need a roll call for that, do we? All those any more discussion? All those in favor of continuing our discussion to the next meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll continue until the next regular meeting on May 5th. Next item on the agenda is monitoring of historic properties. Do we have anything? Nope. Staff report?
I do have one thing. We manufactured and installed the Main Street Historic District. So in this room, the signs look quite big and rather plummy in color. But if you actually go down to the 800 block of West Main and look at them, they actually look very small and very elegant. They really look very nice. The one on the north end of the block is the property owner. There are some shrubs that are actually kind of in the way of where it would ideally be located, and the property owner is planning to remove those shrubs. So right now, the sign is on an angle to try and get the traffic off of Lincoln to see it. But once he removes those shrubs, we'll be moving it back a little bit and straightening it and putting the sign on the other side, so they're both two-sided. So that's actually why I have the extra one here tonight,
Okay,
I think.
that's it?
Do you want to do that on?
We have no study sessions, so next are announcements. Announcements from staff, yes?
I thought I would let you know about the status. I think it was the last meeting I mentioned an Illinois House bill and an Illinois Senate bill which would enact a state historic tax credit. The original House bill is dead, but the Senate bill actually passed the Senate, Illinois Senate, and has been sent to the Illinois House for consideration. And it is Senate Bill 2559, Senate Bill 2559. The short description is Historic Preservation Tax Credit. But currently, let's see, on March 18th, it was it underwent a first reading in the Illinois House and was referred to the Rules Committee. That's a typical move. Since that time, 13 House members have signed on to be co-sponsors of the bill. And so again, it's in the Rules Committee, and the representatives who are in the Rules Committee, Chairperson Barbara Flynn Curry, William B. Black is the Republican spokesperson from, I believe, from Danville area, Lou Lang, Timothy Schmitz, and Arthur Turner, and those are the members of the Rules Committee. So in order to move ahead, it would have to get out of the Rules Committee and get to the full House of Representatives. Although I would say that the Senate bill, which is now at the House, is very similar to a House bill that was previously defeated in this same General Assembly. So it may or may not happen, but there is certainly a possibility that this historic preservation tax credit could pass should it receive the proper support. And essentially it would be 25% of the cost of rehabilitation could be credited as on Illinois income taxes for the over the 10-year period. And I think there's some other types of taxes as well that it could be used for. The tax credit could be sold for cash, and it's based on a very successful state tax credit in Missouri, also at 25%. Missouri has had this tax credit for right around 10 years now. And the latest study that's come out there have been a number of studies done on how important it's been in Missouri. But the latest study is that in Missouri it's created over 30,000 jobs and has led to over $1.5 billion in investment in historic properties in the state of Missouri. So it's been a very effective tool for both historic preservation and just revitalization in general. The mayor's already come on board as being strongly in favor of this proposed bill. In fact, the city is on the Tax Credit and Economic Development Coalition that's helping support this bill.
Great. Other announcements? Anybody? Okay, can we have a motion to, yes,
Move to adjourn.
second? Seconded by Art. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.